But first, we're all very well aware that there's a housing crisis. But in Victoria, the housing crisis is being made even worse by their cultural heritage process. Now, that process demands that land slated for development first undergoes checks to see if there's any culturally significant sites or artefacts before any houses can be built. Well, according to the Herald Sun, that process is delaying developments by 18 months or more and pushing up housing prices. The developers have to pay holding costs on the land while it sits idle as Indigenous groups inspect the property for artefacts, taking sometimes years to do so. And on top of that, Indigenous groups are charging developers $1,000 a day just to meet with them and $1,500 a day for Indigenous people to oversee cultural heritage advisors, also being paid by developers as they search the property for artefacts. Now, Urban Development Institute of Australia CEO Linda Allison, she told the Herald Sun the holding costs of the delays can make projects completely unfeasible, and those costs just inevitably, if the development does go ahead, get passed on to the home buyer, and that just makes housing even less affordable. So what to do about this problem? Well, the Liberal opposition have made themselves useful for once, and they've come up with a pretty good suggestion. Why don't we put time limits on the Indigenous groups to search for artefacts before development can take place? And why don't we put caps on the amount of money they can charge developers to give certainty and to keep costs down? Sounds pretty sensible. But Victorian Premier Jacinta Allan has described those suggestions as, quote, racist and nasty, which just goes to prove that when you vote for clowns, you end up getting an entire circus. Caleb and Liz, the Victorian government are claiming to fight the housing crisis while exacerbating the housing crisis with a racist policy that, if you dare point it out, gets you labelled racist.
I mean, this is beyond laughable, especially because it has such real-world effects in the middle of a housing crisis, which is nationwide, but also notably in Victoria. This government has committed to building 2.24 million houses by 2051. That's roughly 80,000 a year till 2051. Meanwhile, the rate at which they're building houses currently has dropped to an all-time low in 30 years. This is a 3-decade low. And projects are being held up by this in a state that has 1% Aboriginal people. So it's like, who are you actually helping out here by tying the hands of developers who are building these dwellings that we all desperately need in every single state? Don't call yourself... You're not a serious government. You are not a serious government. You're not a serious leader. The Premier said on Tuesday, these cultural heritage laws are only affecting 1% of development. Really? 1%? I don't think so. They have to do the same as WA did. And WA ditched their cultural heritage laws just over 1 month of it coming into effect because it was simply too hard. They realised the error of their ways. They ate humble pie and they just said, look, we've repealed it.
Well, I can build you 2 million houses within that time frame. They'll just be made of Lego. You won't actually be able to live in them, but you never know these days. They'll probably do something like that and say, look, we did it, here's your 2 million houses. But I love the fact that, of course, she attacks the opposition's idea that, very modest stuff, put a cap on the costs, we'll put a time frame on when all this stuff has to be done, and that there should be audits of the approvals that they then give so that at least there's some oversight over the system. That's somehow nasty racial division. Right. At the same time, the Allan government is reviewing these cultural heritage
secretly
rules because it knows that there's something wrong with them, but it didn't want you to know that they were reviewing the cultural heritage rules because, of course, she's worried about how that might look. We're admitting that there's a problem here. We couldn't possibly have anyone see that because it might be racist. I just love that one by one, all of these little things are starting to fall apart in some way, you know. And I feel like The Voice was the vanguard for all of this. Once The Voice fell over, it was sort of like open season for people to actually start openly admitting that there was something wrong with Indigenous affairs in this country, because all of a sudden we felt emboldened. Or not we, I mean, we've been talking about it for a long time, but people who otherwise had previously felt uncomfortable voicing their opinion because they were worried that they'd be called racist for doing so, have started coming out and saying, yeah, actually, we have a few problems here. So little by little, whether it's the laws in WA, whether it's this, whether it's concerns around spending, people are starting to speak up a little bit. But the fact that she didn't want to tell us that this investigation was going on, I think, says it all. Even she, in her heart of hearts, Jacinta Allen, knows there's something wrong here, but you can't admit it. And of course, the first part of fixing a problem is admitting that there is a problem in the first place. It's pretty basic stuff, but they can't even do that.